Welcome to Firsts in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I am Alton Gansky, author of numerous books, fiction and nonfiction. And glad to be here once again.
And also joining us is Molly Jo Reilly, who has been here for...
Ever. I've been here forever. You just didn't know. I'm stealth-like. You didn't even see me sneak in.
It was pretty remarkable. I hit start broadcast and she jumped in. So she's got in just under the wire, racing home from work, hard at work. So Molly, we're glad that you joined us. Why don't you introduce yourself?
I am Molly Jo Reilly, curator of the Unemployment Cookbook, producer of the First in Fiction podcast, and hopefully the soon-to-be-released location mystery novel, NOLA.
I feel, you see, you guys got great intros. I feel like I keep feeling like I'm leaving my books out since I mentioned some and not the others. Maybe I need a new shtick. I don't know.
Talk about the time you killed Bigfoot.
Yes, I could do that. Bigfoot killer and novelist.
There you go.
Teacher and sidebar. My school is undergoing a WASC accreditation this week, and so my principal made me a little name tag, and it had all of my responsibilities and duties on the thing. The thing is, it's 8.5 by 11 paper that I just wear as a name badge with all the little things that I do at the school. It's pretty remarkable and funny and comedic. Yeah, so I do a lot of things, but glad that you guys could join us. It has been a while. It's been a while. It's been 3 weeks. Last week I was out at a WASC visit, which is not related to the WASC visit that's at my school currently. So if you're not familiar with education, WASC stands for Western Association of Schools and Colleges. They come by and make sure the schools are doing a good job educating the children. It is a lot of work. So I've been super busy. I apologize for missing you guys last week. Glad to be with you here this week and glad to kind of be back into the swing of things. We will be proceeding as normal from this point forward. So we will not cast next week. We're just going to go ahead and maintain our 2-week schedule, and we're just kind of pushing back all of our casts by 1 week. So we'll be back again in 2 weeks. But for now, let's jump into our novel spotlight, which I have greedily taken over. I have some of my students analyzing books for a novel project, and a couple of them are working on The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And I thought that is a quality book. Love Cormac McCarthy. A bit of a content warning. It is pretty graphic in places in terms of violence, and I don't want to say it's horror because it's not really horror. It's very literary, actually, but it does take place in a post-apocalyptic world. It is strange to say that the genre is literary post-apocalypse, post-apocalyptic literary fiction. It's very bizarre in that way, but McCarthy is one of our great living authors, great American treasure, and very unique, distinctive style, very beautiful and eloquent. It's not for everybody in terms of some people don't like his style of his voice, which is minimalistic. He uses a lot of conjunctions, somewhat simplistic language, depending on the characters, but he can also write some very beautiful prose, some great figurative language, almost poetic at places, just crippling imagery, and you'd be hard pressed to find a book that's going to move you as much as The Road does. It's a highly emotional journey. I've been talking a lot about it. I haven't even told you the premise of it, but post-apocalypse, probably North America somewhere. Father and son, they've got one gun between them to protect themselves. The land is entirely populated with cannibals. And all sorts of evil people. And because it's post-apocalypse, it's every man / woman / child for themselves. And so you've got a father and a son in dire circumstances, and the son is still young, so the father's trying to bring him up the right way, trying to teach him the difference between right and wrong. And the boy is trying to keep the father honest, and it's really if you don't like emotional books, maybe stay away from this one. I'm kind of a sucker for books that explore the father-son relationship, and this one has a lot to say about that dynamic and what a father is going to do for his son. It was turned into a movie. The movie's pretty good. It's not a bad movie. Book is, in my opinion, better. Just, books are generally better than their movies, though that's not always true. It is a pretty good
It's
rule.
mostly true.
Mostly true. I do feel like film is catching up to the novel in a lot of ways with some of the special effects that they're able to do, but it's still it's a different genre. It's a different type of art, and this novel is one that's going to sit with you for a very long time. Super easy read, very quick, very easy to get through, but it's a story that's going to stick with you for years and years and years after. It's probably one of my top. It may be one of my top 5 novels. Definitely top 10. So if you get a chance, Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Highly, highly recommend that. So with that, let's jump into our topic. Pops, what do we have on the docket today?
Well, after listening to you describe Cormac McCarthy's writing, I just realized how much the Cormac McCarthy and I have in common, because I've crippled some prose myself.
Okay. It's not crippled prose. It's emotionally crippled. Okay.
Oh, it's crippling prose.
Yeah.
Oh,
well done. It's prose that will emotionally resonate with you. How about that?
I've crippled a few stories and some prose.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were a poet, I probably would have crippled some of that too. So, well, thank you for that, Aaron. Well, today we're going to be talking about avoiding writerly mental mistakes. Through the course of our careers and stuff, we've encountered a lot of people who have done things that make you think that they're trying to, well, not cripple prose, but maybe cripple their chances of being published. And so we want to deal with the things you should avoid, or the thoughts you should have, or the mental mistakes that we all make from time to time. And some of them are rather surprising. Now, a few of these, we're going to begin by saying something like you. For example, the first is going to be you have nothing to learn. We're not talking to you specifically. We're talking about the people who are making the mistakes. So don't take it personally. If you do take it personally, let me know. I'll give you Aaron's address and phone number, and you can take it up with him.
And then I'll tell you why it was all Pops' idea.
And I'm just going to sit back and watch the show.
All righty. Well, we have, and I especially have, because I've done a lot of editing, and I've done a lot of writers' conferences and led a writers' conference for 5 or 6 years. And so I have seen people who have torpedoed their own efforts just by their attitude. So what we're going to do is look at some of these missteps to alert you to them, to make sure that you're not making them, or to, if you are making them, to get you to focus on that and what you can do about that. And most likely I've made some of these myself. We all make mistakes, but that's what you do, is you learn from the mistakes and try to move on. So with that, we're going to start off here with the problem of pride. And though when you get too prideful about who you are and your writing and your dreams, it's very possible that you start making these kinds of mistakes. Number one, you believe you have nothing to learn, that you just know everything there is to know about writing, and you have nothing more to learn. Allow me to say this, and I say this in all kindness and in love. You do. Everyone has something to learn. And it doesn't matter how many books you write, there's always stuff to be learned and stuff to be relearned as we go along. So even the masters, even the greatest of all writers, had stuff to learn. There have been a couple of those who said they didn't, but you know they did. They read widely. Hemingway often complained about F. Scott Fitzgerald, but all it tells me is that he read F. Scott Fitzgerald. He read everything he wrote, so otherwise he wouldn't be able to complain about it. So there's some learning going on there. So even the masters still read, they still study. And if you ask any professional, once they stop actively practicing and studying, they will tell you they cease to be at the top of their game. They begin to slip. I always think of it like throwing a ball straight up in the air. Depending on how much force you put behind that, much energy you put into it, it'll rise a certain distance, and then it will pause for just a short time as though there's no gravity, but then it begins to plummet back. And that's pretty much the way we are. If we are not adding to our knowledge, to our skill, to our experience, at some point we're going to hover for a little bit and then fall back to earth. So this is true not only of writers, really it's true of doctors, athletes, artists of any kind, just any other line of professional work, there's always this need to keep going. So I would say no one knows it all. Constant learning keeps the writer sharp, keeps the writer thinking, and thereby moving forward. Did all that make sense?
Yes.
Indeed. It's a good point about other professionals still studying. In the education industry, we have professional development. We still go to seminars and conferences and to learn how to be a more effective teacher. And principals go to find out how to be more effective principals. And we do things like WASC to find out if we're doing a good job. Doctors and nurses are required to continue to take classes and read magazines and keep up with the newest medical trends. Can you imagine seeing a doctor who hasn't read a medical text or article in 50 years? That's not a doctor you want practicing medicine on you. You want somebody who's in the know, who knows the current trends and is able to practice them. And writing is the same way. You want to be able to continue to study, develop yourself. That looks different for writing than it does in other industries. Sometimes it's writers' conferences. We've got those, plug into those. We've got plenty of podcasts. Subscribe to some podcasts. There are magazines you can subscribe to. There's no shortage of avenues for you to pursue if you are interested in learning more about the craft. I would suggest humbly that you subscribe to our podcast and then tell all your friends about it as well. And then you will publish a bestseller.
As you say that, Aaron, it gets me thinking about Tony Gwynn, who was one of the best batters in baseball, best hitters, I should say, in baseball. Long career. The late Tony Gwynn died far too young. But you talk to him, one, he maintained a level of humility, but he would also talk about the batters that he studied. And all through his career, he would study film of the other great batters, great hitters in baseball, and he kept that up through his entire career. And I'm thinking if Tony Gwynn needs to continue to study how to swing a bat, I probably need to continue to study on how to write a story, whether short or long. Write a novel. I need to keep looking.
In the music industry, I remember Alice in Chains Unplugged, and when they came out, Metallica was there in the audience sitting in the front. And this was right after Metallica. They had all cut their hair and it was short and stuff. They cut their, long hair. And so Alice in Chains came out and they were wearing shirts that said, "Friends don't let friends cut their hair." But the point I want to make there is that Metallica, arguably the greatest metal/rock band ever, most successful, probably the longest longevity of maybe any band ever. They've been doing it for decades and decades and decades. They are still attending shows. They're still studying and learning the craft and constantly trying to better themselves. Even if you don't like them, it's not your taste in music, that's fine. The point is that they still work. And that's one reason why they've been successful for this long. So keep it up. Keep learning. The second mistake that a lot of writers make is that they think they can write better than what's being published, even though they've never done it before. Sometimes things are easier to say than to do. It's for every quarterback out there, there's a million armchair quarterbacks who say, "Oh, I could have made that throw. Oh, that I've done it. I was breaking down film of the NFL playoffs this last year saying, "Oh, they made this mistake. They made that mistake." Well, of course, they're going to make mistakes and they've got a 1,000 cameras on them every week. I'm not going to be perfect if you put 1,000 cameras on me and follow me around throughout the week. Pretty close, but I'll make some mistakes. It's very easy to say that you can do a better job than someone, but it's very difficult to do that in practicality. Number one. Number two, it's super arrogant to think that. And you need to have a little bit of confidence as a writer. You have to be able to have that confidence. But, I liken it to athletes who want to be confident, but you also don't want them to be kind of arrogant jerks. You want them to have a sense of humility. I loved Barry Sanders, one of my favorite football players of all time. Loved when he would score a touchdown. He'd find the ref, hand the ball to the ref, and walk back to the bench. He did his job. Hooray. It's not to say I don't like the people who dance in the end zone. Sometimes it's fun and entertaining, and they're from their perspective, doing their job of entertaining fans, and that's great. But there's a certain lack of the look at me that Barry Sanders had. He was an artist on the football field, and he did it with humility and grace. And that to me is always more inspiring than some of the louder athletes who are always complaining and touting their abilities over everybody else. It's kind of puts people off. Those types of people are not fun to hang out with. And so you want to avoid giving off that vibe. Number one. Number two, when you think that way, you tend to write poorly. You tend to try and write and show off what you can do. And usually that falls flat, because now you're not writing to tell a story, you're writing to prove a point. And while fiction can prove point and can change the world, you're getting the cart before the horse if you're out to make a point before you're out to write a good story. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And, it's part of human nature, and some people really fall into it. It becomes a trap. Sometimes we have a tendency to think that the only way I can feel good about myself is to tear someone else down. And we see a lot of Stephen King has taken a beating of not being a real writer because he doesn't write literary stuff. He writes horror. Sort of, the Mick literature. He's sort of the McDonald's of the dining world. But that's not true. He's an excellent writer. I don't always like what he writes, but that has to do with me, not with his skill and his ability. Right. He can tell a story and pull you in, and that's why I think he's had so much success. And this is often done in the literary world, and it's especially done by people who have not published but want to publish, and they think the only way that they can feel worthy of being published or have people think highly of them is to tear down other writers and thereby lower the playing field. And I want to tell you not to do that. I'll give you an example of this. I once received an email, and I almost always turn these down because I just don't have really the time or, and I'll be honest with you, the inclination to do this. But someone wanted me to help them with a proposal. It came to me this way. They said, I've had this proposal and I must have put it out 20 times and no one's interested in it. Can you tell me what I'm doing wrong? I said, all right, I'll take a look at it. I'm not going to read the book, but I'll look at the front matter of the proposal. Go ahead and send that to me. And the first line I read was, I don't read much fiction, but I know I can do better than what's being published now.
Oh.
And that was the first line. And I had to write him back and I said, you're kidding me, right? You don't know what the problem is? And he said he didn't, but here's what the problem was. First of all, he admitted his ignorance about the market because he doesn't know what's out there. He says, I don't read, but I know I can do better. Well, how do you know that if you don't read it? So I made him look really foolish to do that. So he showed an ignorance about the market. Secondly, he insulted published authors everywhere. He just asked the published author, me, to help him get his book out by studying his proposal and improving it. And in the first line I read in the thing, he tells me he can write better than me. Not directly, but he can just write better than the authors who are out there. Well, I'm one of the authors that's been out there. So he insulted published authors, including me. He insulted editors and publishers, saying they don't know what's good. I don't know if he meant to say that or not, but it's certainly implied in the line. He insulted editors and the publishers. And then he stated that he knew better than those who did the work for a living. But he has never done it. I can tell you right now, I spent over 10 years in architecture, and I can go out to a job site and I can tell whether or not the carpenter's doing a good job, but don't ask me to do it because that's a skill I don't have. They're especially trained, and there's no way I'm going to start saying I'm a better carpenter than you because I'm not, and I never will be. So he stated he knew better than those who were doing the work for a living. That's how they were making their money. I'm talking about the editors, the publishers, and the writers. And since I'm one of the authors in the field, as I said, he insulted me. And then he asked for my help. Okay. And the odd thing to me was that he did not even recognize what he was doing. So I wrote back and said that's the first thing he has to do is get rid of that line. And he was going to have to change that attitude. I didn't follow up on them. I don't know if anything improved for them, but when you start thinking that you can write better than those who are being published, even if you can, there are some up and coming writers that are better than most things that are published. There's some things that get published. I don't know why they get published, but that's not the norm. That's the exception. You know, they've struck a nerd or find a little niche that people are really into, and they can become bestsellers even if the writing is bad. But for the most part, it's very unwise to say you can do work that you've never done better than those who've been doing it for their living for a while. So that's a real mistake, and there's no need to tear any other writer down. This is one thing, and you mentioned this when you were talking about the metal bands, Metallica and the others. One of the things I've noticed, and seeing some biographies and stuff, watching them, is how interested they are in other musicians' success. They learn from them. They study from them. I remember the Beatles talking about studying the great blues singers and guitarists, and bringing some of that into their work, as well as many others. They pulled from everywhere and learned from everyone. They didn't have to run them down. Instead, they were mentors. And that's why they achieved their great success. So, yeah, don't ever say you can write better than what's being published out there. Just do the best you can on it, and then prove it.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Pops, before you take us to number 3. But I just wanted to say that one of the strategies that I saw that was very beneficial for those writing query letters to the Citron Review is when they would say, I've read your publication. I particularly enjoyed this piece by this author. I really liked the voice that they established, or the way they developed the character, or whatever it was, something specific. And then said, I've tried to do something similar in this piece. I hope that it's to your taste, or something like that. This is a humble attitude that put me as an editor in the right frame of mind, that says, here's somebody who's read what we're doing and understands what we're about, has already taken the time to look at that. I know they've read it because they've referenced a piece that I've already published, and they liked something that I liked about it, which means that they're probably doing something similar in their work. So now I'm in a frame of mind where I want to take this piece. As a matter of fact, I think the first time I read a query letter like that, I wrote back and I said, your submission is not necessarily for us, but your query letter was outstanding. I'd love to use this as an example to give to other writers. And I said, I want to publish you, send me something else. And this particular writer, bless his heart, sent me something, must have been every 4 to 6 weeks, and something polished and good. And for whatever reason, we just could not find a match. And then, a couple months later, we found the match, and we were able to publish it. And we were both, we were ecstatic about it. I was as excited to run something by him as he was to finally make it into our magazine. But it was one of those things where whenever I saw his name, it went to the top of my list. I'm reading this guy, and I'm going to give him notes on everything. And sometimes it was just, can you rework this, and we can run this, or whatever the case may be. But it was a really positive interaction. And so if you in proposals and the like, instead of saying that you can do better than what's published, instead find something good that's being published and say, I appreciate this, especially if you're seeking publication from a publisher. You've run this series of novels and it's really impacted my life, and I'd love to be able to have my title be under your name in your catalog, something like that. Now, instead of insulting, you are encouraging, and you're showing a like mind, and it's going to put the editor in the right frame of mind.
Exactly. Well, here's another mistake along this same line of pride getting in the way. And there are writers like this who believe that the genius of their story will immediately be recognized by everyone. And I have seen, we sometimes see this in writers' conferences when people present stuff. You would see things like, if you don't publish this, you're crazy. I've been told that. I know a lot of editors have been told that. I've even had somebody tell me, God told me that you're the one to get this book published. And I remember saying, well, that's odd. I spoke to him this morning. He didn't mention you at all. And I know I tend to be that way. I'm sorry, it's an emotional mental fault of mine, but that's, I don't like being manipulated. And the idea was her stuff was horrible. Unless God was passing the buck, I don't think that the voice she heard was necessarily his. And then I topped it off by simply saying, you're aware that I'm not a publisher and I'm not an editor, so I really can't publish it for you. So, go ahead, Aaron. You have a little something to add to this, I know.
Yeah, I didn't want to say anything. I was thinking about just disconnecting from the call and running, but early on, this is the way my pride manifested itself is new writer, and you think you're fancy, you think you're good. I'm speaking generally here, not of you specifically, but in my case, I thought I was some, I had a master's degree. I had my bachelor's degree in fiction, so I've read all the greats. I know what I'm doing, and I'm going to be a literary giant, and everybody's going to be reading my works in their classrooms, and it's going to be, all of this. And then whenever I got a rejection letter, oh, well, America's getting dumber. That's the problem. No one recognizes my genius. That's again, you know what it was? It goes back to that issue of I was no longer trying to tell a good story. I was trying to show off. No amount of neon signs is going to make up for the condition of the casino. If it's dirty and scummy and gross and smelly, no one's going in. It doesn't matter how bright and shiny the outside is. The heart of the story is what matters. I will say that my work improved dramatically once I kicked my ego to the curb. And to be honest, I can't take full credit for kicking my ego to the curb. That a lot of editors helped with that. A lot of people were loved me enough to say, "Kid, you ain't there yet. Pops, you were always good about crushing my spirit, giving me some notes on things where
So that's where you get it from.
A man does what a man can,
Yeah.
It was my pleasure.
Yeah, but it's one of those things that sneaks up on you, and if you're not kind of guarding yourself and approaching it with a certain amount of humility, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to get very far, even if you are good. Again, even if you are good, not everybody's going to get it. My students are doing reviews of books, and they're petitioning a class. They're arguing that we should analyze a particular book. One of the things I'm having them do is find 5-star Amazon reviews and 1-star Amazon reviews. People are giving 1-star Amazon reviews to 1984. People are giving 1-star reviews to Cormac McCarthy's The Road. People are giving 1-star reviews to Slaughterhouse-Five. People are giving 1-star. I mean, are you kidding me? Like the Bible, 1-star review. Like, come on. Those people exist. But you have to you're not in it for them. You're not in it for the reviews. You're in it to do the best that you can and let the story tell itself. You're a conduit, and let the story tell itself, and then and get yourself out of the way. I've done a lot of blogging on that. Get your ego out of the way. Let the story do the work. And I firmly believe that. Stephen King says some similar things, but make sure that if you're writing just so your genius is going to be recognized, there's probably a better line of work for you than writing.
As you're talking about that, I'm thinking about I had switched publishers, and I'd moved up to a larger publisher, so I was feeling pretty good about myself. And I think I'd already done, I don't know, 3 books, maybe 4 books, something like that. And I'm feeling pretty good about that. But this bigger publisher, tied with Harper Row, and it was just, this was high cotton for me. And it's not my first book, so, they're going to really appreciate me. And then my editor sent me a letter, and it was very praiseworthy. He just really built my ego up. And that was followed by 20 pages of things I had to correct. 20 pages of things I had to address. And I thought, it was very humbling, very humbling. And I wrote a lot of books for him. And every time I tried to make sure that I had less pages from the editor than I did of the previous books. And I learned a lot. So sometimes a slap down is one of the best things you can get to get you back on the right track. So here's what I found, and I know this is going to be anecdotal, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. My experience has been that, generally speaking, arrogant writers are not nearly as good as they think they are. Now, there have been a few, especially in general market, that have been very arrogant about their work, and they were very, very good. Thomas Wolfe being one, Truman Capote, that kind of stuff. But
Ayn Rand.
Yeah, but they earned the right to be arrogant. I didn't think it was the way to go, but nonetheless, that was them, and they could back it up. Most arrogant writers can't. They're not nearly as good as they think they are, and humble writers are often better than they think they are. And I'm thinking of somebody we know. I'm not going to mention a name now, but she had come to me and was ready to quit. And she said, I just can't get much interest in it, and I just don't think I can write. And I remember going through it and thinking, man, I wish I couldn't write like you can't write. It was great. Very gifted writer. It was circumstance that was, keeping it from being published. And later it was published. But I think the reason the humble sometimes are better writers is they work harder. Maybe it's that insecurity that many writers have. I'm very insecure about my writing. I did not read any of my published books until I started republishing once they went out of print. I just couldn't do it. Just too insecure. I always find something I wanted to change. But it helped me grow. So, and again, I acknowledge there have been many great writers who were arrogant, but not as many. And it's just a bad tactic to take if you're trying to get published.
It is. The insecurity that you're talking about, I think, encourages people to continue to study. Like you say, continue to work hard. It encourages them to work hard. Again, that humility is what makes a good writer. Somebody who, even if they're good and even if they've got that confidence, which they need, they also have to understand that there's still a process to go through, and the process doesn't end. It's something that you keep doing. So something that benefits you is remaining humble, not necessarily being insecure, but if you're going to be insecure, you might as well use it to your advantage and make it a point of study, to a further study. So number 4, thinking the industry will conform to you. And when I first read this on the show notes, I misread it and wrote lovely notes that had nothing to do with what this is talking about. So now I'm going to wing it. Publishing is one of those things. It's what makes a bestseller. We don't really know. Thinking that, for example, if we use Harry Potter as an example here, thinking that we're going to publish Harry Potter and then everybody's going to start geeking out about wizards is pretty ridiculous. Publishing Twilight and, vampire romance is going to be a thing. What? No, that's weird. But they did change the market. But the industry didn't necessarily conform to them. It was something that was published and that just kind of hit. The industry is not going to change for you. If you start demanding that on your contract that you've got to have, 5,000 copies, author copies, instead of the standard, 1,000 that this publisher does, probably not going to do it unless you're Stephen King, in which case maybe. But for the most part, the industry is not going to conform to you, and they really shouldn't. It's for the most part functional, and they've been doing it for a while. And if that's the case, then you need to kind of roll with those punches and follow their lead. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And when I first wrote that line, thinking the industry will conform to you, I have seen and heard stories of writers who want to get published, and they're not willing to even go so far as to format their manuscript correctly. They would say, well, the editors can do that. Or I know, this probably isn't in the mainstream of what this person publishes, but once they read it, I'm sure they'll change their mind and change all their forecasting and publish the book just because they love it that much. And the truth is, it won't. Publishing is a business. They're out to make money. And if they don't think they can make money off what you give them, they're not going to make any changes. Now, you bring up some good points about, for example, Harry Potter. Who would have predicted that? Well, that thing was rejected how many times? 20, 30 times? Before Scholastic. And of all the publishers to buy it, Scholastic bought it. And boom, did that take off. Well, no one saw that coming. The Left Behind series, Jerry Jenkins and Tim LaHaye working on those. Jerry Jenkins, who really did the writing of it, just thought it was another co-writing assignment. I've heard him say many times, it was just another job. I did the best I could with it, but I didn't imagine that it would ever take off like that. No one did. So you're right. We don't really know what causes a bestseller. They're usually surprises. And sometimes you get somebody that's almost gifted. Perkins, for example, seeing F. Scott Fitzgerald's books as having great potential when no one else would. But he's a rare breed. He was extremely gifted at finding those things. Thomas Wolfe and Ernest Hemingway and those kinds of people, because he could recognize it. Not everybody can do that, but the industry will not conform for me. They won't change for me. They're not going to change for really any writer. Sometimes a best-selling novelist can get away with something. I'm thinking of Grisham. One of his books that he wanted to do, he was advised not to do it. The publisher didn't want to do it. It was just very far from his legal thrillers. But he said, no, this is my next book. So if you don't want to publish it, let me know. And I'll get someone else to publish it. Well, it did very well. Made millions. So it's hard to change them, but they're not going to conform, especially if you're an unknown writer. So the writer has to take time to learn the craft. And the key here is not to rely too much on emotion. Creatives tend to be a little insecure about their work. It's one reason why we writers, even when we're asked to do so by an editor or a publisher, won't turn our manuscripts in because we're afraid of rejection. Well, you're going to get rejections. That's just the way it is. But always keep in mind that the publisher does this and has probably done it for many decades. And they know for the most part what they're doing. They do make mistakes. I do know a publisher that paid a husband and wife couple over $1 million in advance to do their next book. Yeah, book tanked, and it almost brought down the publishing house. Well, if you look at the numbers and stuff, you made a good decision initially. No one really knows.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And number 5 here is believing that a first draft is all you need. This is something that my students believe.
It's something that I used to believe until I finished NOLA and typed the end. And then I was like, okay, so everybody else was right and I was wrong. Here we go again.
Now the work begins. And even when you finish NOLA, it wasn't a first draft. And I don't mean that to be
no. Well, the last 12 chapters were a first draft, but the first 12 were like a 5th and a 6th and an 8th draft.
But you wrote the end, didn't you?
I finally wrote the end.
And now you can go back and look at it holistically rather than as a piece of a work. And so, we throw a term around in the industry called crummy first drafts. Most people use stronger language than that. And I think the term originated with Annie Lamott, Bird by Bird. And if she didn't originate it, then it picked up popularity from there. And she may be quoting someone, I can't remember exactly, but the idea is the first draft is a very thorough outline for most people. Even if your first draft is really clean and really polished, it's still not done. And even if you wrote an amazing first draft, can't you do better on the second draft? The idea is that seldom does revision ever weaken a work. It can only strengthen it. now you've written an entire novel, and you've got that experience behind you, and you understand your characters a little bit better. I remember finishing several novels where I get to the final chapters and I go, that's who that character is. Now I get it. And I have to go back and rewrite everything from that, character's perspective to make everything add up. But at least for me as an intuitive writer or discovery writer, the first draft is exploration. It's I'm driving down the road with my headlights on. I can't see the ending, but I can see far enough to get me there. The second draft, the revision, is when the sun is up and everything is in view. And then you can make course corrections that way. So first draft, never going to be as good as a second and third and fourth, and sometimes 28th and 29th and 30th draft are going to be.
Now that can vary how you do that. The first draft really is a sort of an expanded outline. It's your discovery time. It's your draft. It's not meant to go to the publisher. It's sort of your copy. It doesn't need to be complete. And I think I've mentioned, I think it's Angie Hunt that does this. She just writes as fast as she can. And if she gets to something she can't figure out, she just puts a note in the manuscript. Need to figure this out. Gives a couple extra spaces, and then gets going with the next stuff. And then she goes back, and that's really where the magic is in the second draft. Now, that doesn't mean you have to write the whole book and then go back and start all over. That's really a good way to do it, and most writers will do that. Some do it piecemeal. That is, they'll write a chapter, then they'll write another chapter, but they'll go back and rewrite the first chapter. Then they'll write the third chapter, go back, rewrite the second chapter. Some do it by rewriting what they wrote the day before and then moving on. I've done that for quite a bit, and then I think on Fridays I would rewrite do another draft of that week's production and go back, and because it usually primed me for what else was going to happen. So, do what works for you. Find out. Remember, we've talked about this, how your brain works. And it's Dean Koontz who does one page at a time and rewrites it till he has it perfect, and he'll start the next page. Don't mimic what others do. Do what works for you. But there needs to be more than a first draft. It has to be gone over. And that's really, believe it or not, where the magic is. A lot of us don't like rewriting because we had to do it in school. And it was forced upon us, and we were writing things we didn't care about. Well, if you're writing, say, a novel or a novella, short story, whatever it may be, the real magic, the real fun isn't in the first draft. That's painful. That's the gym work. That's where you're doing all the exercising, and there's a lot of pain with it. The second draft, as you said, the sun is shining on it. Now you can go back and you can take out unnecessary words. You can fine-tune dialogue. Suddenly a new thought will occur to you that if you add these 2 or 3 paragraphs, this will be stronger. And it is far more fun reworking than it is working.
I always feel like the second draft and the third draft is where I can be brilliant. Mm-hmm. The first draft, I need to be efficient and get to the point and get to the end. I'll leave myself notes, make her want it. You got to earn this, really feel it here, right. Develop this, those types of things, to where even cliches, I've got all sorts of cliches in my first drafts. I don't care. I just, right. A little note, better description, go, better metaphor, go. And I love being able to get to those points and say, oh, I can really slow down here and add in some stuff, or, oh, this part's really kind of slow. Let's trim some stuff up. I don't need this here. So I always feel like second draft, third draft is where I can be brilliant, and the first draft is where I need to be, need to serve the story. And then it's pruning after that. The tree is grown, the bush is grown. Now we just need to prune it into the shape that we want it to take. It's the final coat of paint. The assembly work is done. So now we can make it pretty. That's what I like about it.
All right.
Yeah.
There's also a tendency, this is another misstep by some budding writers. There's a tendency to argue with people who buy ink by the barrel. Mm-hmm. Now, I stole that line from Ben Bova, science fiction writer. It's Dr. Ben Bova now. When I was first getting some interest in writing, I think I sent a short story to one of the magazines he was editing at the time, and I don't know, it was a miserable piece of work that I sent in. I probably should find him and apologize. But I was learning. So, but you'd get a form letter back. You might get another letter too, but there's always a form in there giving, like, frequently asked question, giving that kind of information to you so you can grow as a writer. And the first line on it is, never argue with a man who buys ink by the barrel. Meaning, this is what I do all day long, is read, edit, publish, read, edit, publish. This is my life. So don't argue with me, because I've got barrels of ink. You're trying to sell one story. I've got years worth of stuff behind me and years more to go. So don't argue with the professionals in it. You may not always agree with them. They're not always right. I've known several editors to be wrong. But I've also known myself to be wrong, so I don't, really care. I don't hold that against them. But don't fall into that tendency of wanting to argue with the professionals on it. They have a reason for the decisions they make, usually.
Well, number one and number two, you gotta their experience is there, and they typically are going to know best. But again, it goes back to that idea of the humility. You just need to be humble and trying to improve your work. I think that kind of leads into our next point, which is thinking that your manuscript is perfect. Even second drafts, even third drafts. It's really interesting to do 2, 3, 4, 5 drafts, and by the time you actually send it off to the publisher, you've already taken 4 or 5 passes at this thing. Maybe your beta readers have looked at it. Maybe if you've got alpha readers, they've put in their comments, and you've worked at this and you've been putting in the time and you've rolled up your sleeves and you got it done. And what you send off is, let's say draft number 7. And what's the first thing that they do? Even if they accept it, they say, we're going to need to edit this. And you wait, what? What do you know? It's already been edited 7 times. Oh, that's a good start. That's cute. 7, that's adorable. I don't know what round I'm on now. I just, the file names of some of the Hand of Adonai series that we're working on, the 3rd book now is, version 12.2936.82. It's like a star date. I don't even know what's happening. It's but it's we've taken, and the book is stronger. The book is better for it. The book is absolutely better for it. And you just have to kind of get used to that. Again, we're talking about kind of this humility. I worked with an award-winning flash fiction writer when I was at the Citron Review. And my comment to him was, we really need to work on this. Everyone else, all the other editors wanted to publish it. I was reluctant. I didn't think it was there. I didn't realize the reputation he had in the community at the time. And so I sent him a letter and I said, everyone likes it, but I think we're going to need some work on this. And his comment was, that's fine. Make whatever changes you want. I'll just change it back when I publish it, in my book. And I was like, oh, in your book. Okay. And then I realized that's what he does. And I said, well, I stuck to my guns. I said, I really think the story is going to read better if we handle it this way. And so he said, sure, he was a good sport. Yeah, I'll give that a shot. Let's do it. And he changed it. And he said, the story is better now. He had, even though at the time I'm a lowly publisher of a tiny digital magazine, he's not getting paid for this, but he typically gets paid for his writing. But for whatever reason, he came to us, and but he still had enough humility to say, yeah, I think your changes have improved it. So that was kind of a shiny victory for me. But you tend to learn a few things when you do some editing, and sometimes they're not just giving you bad advice. They're not trying to sabotage you, especially if they're working with a publisher. No editor tries to sabotage you. No editor thinks, gee, if this book tanks, my reputation is going to be solidified. I'm going to build a reputation on ruining people's books. No one thinks that way. They're working with you. So just understand that they're partners. They're not adversaries.
Yeah, and no one likes it. I hate being edited. I hate not being edited more. And so it's just something I have to put up with. And all the great writers have had strong editors. So, and they didn't like it either. Usually they would thank them later for it, but that's normal. it's sometimes we feel like what the editor's doing is calling our baby ugly. And I've done some things where the baby was pretty ugly. And I've had some experiences where I get asked to edit some work, and occasionally I'm editing somebody who's been on a bestseller list. Did that not long ago for a novelization of a movie. And the guy's been on the New York Times bestseller list, really knows what he's doing. It was the most fun I had editing a book ever because it was largely clean, but he had a few holes in it, a couple of inconsistencies. There were times when he's maybe not using the right word or could use a stronger word, or he was cluttering things with words he didn't need. But it wasn't a ton of work. And I don't think I've ever had a writer more thankful, put me in the acknowledgments and all that stuff, which is always fun. Now, I'm not going to tell you he liked it. He liked the end product, but nobody likes to go through that. So remember what a novel is. It's a tapestry of 100,000 strings, except we use words, 100,000 threads, sometimes more, sometimes less. It doesn't really matter. 100,000 is easy to work with as an example. And that means you have 100,000 opportunities to mess up. What an editor does is try to keep you from messing up, try to find the things you can't see that you go blind to. And there are commercial on television now that somebody's gone nose blind. Nose blind. But anyway, I guess that's the point, is to get a little catchy phrase there. But there are things in my manuscripts I just can't see because I keep reading what I mean and what's supposed to be there, not what is there. So I appreciate a good edit. So I used to tell people, especially back in my preacher days, I'd tell my deacons this: don't expect people to be perfect. If you do, you will always be disappointed. And don't pretend that you're perfect, because trust me, everyone else will be disappointed because you're not. Don't expect perfection. Don't expect perfection out of your first draft or your second draft. Don't expect perfection out of editors. Humans are never perfect, but we work together and we get a good product out.
I'm still sitting over here trying to decide if that ugly baby you're talking about was me.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Yeah. A hush falls over the crowd.
You're breaking up.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't you.
Yeah.
I was talking about something I had written, not
I know.
not you.
Sure. We'll go with that.
Thank you, Molly. Again, humility.
Just remember, they like me better.
Getting a good dose of that tonight. So we're running up against the clock here. We've got a few other points to make, though. I feel like we've largely covered them in some of these. A lot of these go back to pride, but if we think about it, some of these prideful mistakes really come from ignorance. Like, they're not very seldom. For example, the guy that wrote you the letter that says, I don't read fiction often, but I know I could do better. That's arrogance, but it's also ignorance to a large extent. And people who haven't been writing for a long time, it's the kid who says a bad word before they realize how bad it is. And so a lot of it's just learning. But I'll just list a couple of mistakes that that writers tend to make in ignorance and innocence pops. I'll let you look at the impossible expectations. But one of the things that new writers tend to mistakenly believe is that writing and publishing forget that writing and publishing is a learning process. They think that you should know it all going in. You don't. No one ever does. You have to work at it. You have to continually improve your craft. We've talked about the professional athletes who do the same thing. They go into training year round, rarely taking days off. It's since we have a sports thing going, as we said in the chat room at one point, I figured I'd continue that. And the other one is a lot of writers don't take the time to learn the terminology and the necessary process. Give yourself that time. You've heard us tout writers' conferences quite a bit. They're just really good to be in communication and get to know publishers and editors and get to see the process and understand the process in a way that you can't just by sitting at home and reading a book. Sometimes it takes meeting someone face to face and explaining it to you. So there are lots of ways to do that. Again, podcasts, there's lots of professional development that you can do. But learn the language of the business. And again, if you ever have any questions, shoot us an email. Find me at aarongansky.com. I still got the Ask the Author there. And even though we may not cover the Ask the Authors on air, I do respond to those via email, and I try and respond to those quickly. So, if you need to learn more, we're always here. That's what we're here for. It's free. We just try and keep you guys in the know and help you out as much as possible so that you're not making some of these mistakes out of ignorance. We want you to be well educated and well informed. Pops, a lot of times new writers have impossible expectations.
Yeah. I'm going to give you 4 of these. They're all very short, and then we'll wind it up for tonight. Impossible expectations. 1, expecting an agent to edit your manuscript. We see this a lot. Well, isn't that the agent's job? Yeah, don't ever say that, because then they'll know you're an amateur. No, it's not the agent's job. Agents don't edit. Editors don't agent. Editors edit. Agents represent. Know what they do. It's your job to turn in as clean a manuscript as you can. There's no such thing as a perfect manuscript, but turn it in as clean as you can. But the agent will not edit it. An agent who reads through, and they do read very quickly, though, they may catch something and ask you to deal with it, but they're not going to edit it for you. And so you let the editors edit, and you edit your own stuff. So don't expect an agent to edit your manuscript. Here's the second one. Expecting tons of money will be spent promoting your book. No. Oddly enough, the people who get the most marketing money spent on them are the best sellers. If you make a ton of money, they'll spend a ton of money on you. But these days, publishing has changed, and they're really asking authors to do much of the marketing. This is a subject for another cast. I think that's a horrible mistake. It's like asking your dentist to do heart surgery. Most authors are not marketers, but nonetheless, that's what's being expected now. But don't expect tons of money will be spent promoting your book. Most likely, and this also depends on which size publishing house you're in, but you're just one of many books. So keep your expectations in check. The third one is expecting a perfect first draft and not rewriting. Yeah, just see above. We've already beat on that one for a while. That's not going to happen. I did have somebody tell me I never rewrite. I write once and that's it. And I said, how much have you published? And he said, nothing. Then that was the end of the conversation. I don't know that he ever has. That's just the wrong attitude. And I don't cook. I don't cook my food. I love a good steak, but I only cook one side of it. And then also thinking that reading is unimportant. That's our last one. Reading still is important. We would tackle this one before, so you can go back and catch that one, Reading Like a Writer, which we did a week or two ago, or I should say an episode or two ago. But if you still haven't bought into that, you need to do it. Reading is priming the pup. And for the longest time in my writing, the first thing I would do is, before I'd write, is I would open a book and start reading. And it would trigger that thinking in my mind. I just read a page or two, close the book, and then I've got the prose working in my head. Then I'm reminded what I'm supposed to be doing. So don't have impossible expectations.
Indeed. Yeah. Molly, any questions for us from the chat room?
Dave wants to know, how do we as authors overcome insecurity?
You don't?
I have no idea, Dave.
I got to hit the bestseller list. And
not even then.
No.
If Scott Fitzgerald was an alcoholic, Hemingway was an alcoholic. Was Thomas Wolfe an alcoholic?
So I'm sensing wine and liquor pretty much will take care of it.
Yeah. In fact, I was listening to an author biography, or watching a bit of an author's biography. For the life of me, I can't think of his name now. Don't grow older. Those things happen. But he stopped drinking when the doctor said, well, you're about to die. Okay, so you've lost your family, your career's headed downhill, and now you're going to die. That or quit drinking. Choice is yours. And so, but a lot of that, I think, is from insecurity. I really do. I think it's we just don't get over the insecurity. You learn to manage it.
That's a good way of saying it. You learn to manage it, and I've met some very, very talented writers who were just very insecure, and like you say, it's about managing it. It's about not letting it take over. You want to develop some confidence for sure, and getting a few things published here and there kind of helps you establish a little bit of confidence. There are certain milestones if you're getting your education in it, getting a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or something like that, that can kind of be a little feather in your cap. But the reality is the insecurity, I think, is just part of the beast of being an artist.
I'm not going to psychoanalyze here, but I would not be surprised if a study were done and they found out that the arrogant writers are really compensating for insecurity.
I'd put money on that.
Yeah. Most writers that I know are insecure in some way or another about their writing, and some counter that by being arrogant, pretending that they're not insecure. I think insecurity is part of the creative process. It keeps you going.
Yeah, Hemingway was notoriously insecure.
Was he?
And he would, he would latch on to somebody who had a bigger name than him. And once he became famous, then he, disavowed all knowledge of, I never talked with Fitzgerald. We've got 132 letters here between us to prove it. I never talked to you. But 90% sure over the arrogance is to mask the insecurity. So absolutely. Any other questions for us?
No, some comments about how we all handle our insecurities and creative processing, but no other questions.
Okay, excellent. Well, we did pretty well on time there. So good to be back. We will be back in 2 more weeks when we look at, I should have had this pulled up earlier, Feeding the Beast. Ooh, this is going to be a fun one. Keeping the creativity fed. That's what we're looking at in 2 weeks. So in the meantime, we thank you for listening and for joining us and for chatting with us. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. If you're looking for us throughout the week, you can find us at altongansky.com. You can find Molly at franklymydearmojo.com, and you can find me at aarongansky.com.
I just posted a new blog post on altongansky.com about the problem with sugar water.
All right.
I don't think there's not a problem with sugar water at all.
There's a total problem with sugar water.
It makes me think of Men in Black. Bring me sugar and water.
It comes from a conversation between Steve Jobs and Scully, who became the leader of Apple.
Oh, excellent.
All right. And now I have to read it.
I'm sure that's probably on creativity.
The topic?
Yeah.
Well, don't ruin it for everyone. Just tell them to go to the blog and read it themselves.
Go read it.
Go read it. That's at altongansky.com. And you can always find me at aarongansky.com. So again, thanks for listening. And until next time, good writing.